Okay, I'd like to call to order the Conservation Advisory Council for the town of Niskayuna. This is the July 9th, 2025 meeting. Laura, would you please call the roll?
So we have Portia Zwicker, Ellen Daviero, Dan McPherson, Ashok Ramasubramanian, and Chairman Dart Strayer.
Okay, great. We have no minutes to approve, and we have two people to talk about the greenhouse gas inventory. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to change the agenda. If anybody has any objections, say so, but I'd like to do that first before we go to the rest of the order of business. Okay. All right, well, welcome, and the floor is yours, I should say.
Great, thank you so much. I guess I will stand so I can see my slides over here.
I'm trying to make it full screen.
Whenever you're ready, Laura, you can fire off the presentation. I guess where this is it.
There we go.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting us to give this presentation. This is a presentation of your greenhouse gas emission inventory for your wider community. The last time we did this presentation, we were talking about your government operations and your municipal facilities. This one is now talking about all of your community. Go ahead, next slide, please. Right, so if you don't remember, my name is Jim Yenger from Climate Action Associates. We're the consultant that your town hired to help implement your Climate Smart Communities grant. We are a veteran of climate action here in the Capital District. We were founded 20 years ago. I founded the company and have been a longstanding partner in New York State on developing their local climate action policies, including helping them design the Climate Smart Communities program. I personally wrote the greenhouse gas emission inventory for the is being used by this program. So I know a couple of things, a thing or two about how to do this kind of work. So I'm very pleased to be here and to present to you today. Next slide, please.
Big delay.
Fine. So just to remind everyone, the work plan that we have with the town has three components. The first two were greenhouse gas inventories. We presented your government operations inventory previously. This meeting, we will present to you the second leg, which is your community greenhouse gas inventory. And then finally, the last leg is helping you develop your government operations climate action plan, which means technically we'll work with each of your departments to identify options to reduce emissions. And as I'll discuss in this presentation, we believe your operations are actually very efficient already. So we have indicators from the data we see. So we're looking forward to finding out if there's other options you'll have. Next slide, please. So the first question that people ask, and you've hired us to help you do a greenhouse gas emission inventory. So why do you do that? And an emission inventory, numbers, there's data, people like numbers, they like data, you look at charts. But what's important about the subject of greenhouse gases, particularly for your community, is understanding where the most important sources are, who your most important stakeholders are, who the most important players are in addressing the greenhouse gas emissions problem. So an inventory will help you prioritize and help you identify who your players are. It'll also make sure you're targeting the right things. It's easy for get involved in environmental things and feel good about what we're doing. Some of those things will make a big impact on greenhouse gas emissions and others will not. And so it's important for you for everyone to understand how the actions that we have and the options we have will impact emissions. And we'll talk about what the most important things are, who your most important stakeholders are here today. Next slide, please. And this is informal, so feel free to just interrupt. This is a very short presentation. We have about 50 slides. And then I can ask, you can ask any questions about the data that you would like. So the first step in really thinking about greenhouse gases and how to address the issue is to understand where the common sources are, just to get a sense. And we already know fossil fuels, we already have a sense of that, but there are some other ones. And these are the most important sources that we have that you'll see in your emission inventory. Obviously, the top two are fossil fuels in our buildings. So that would be oil and gas, primarily propane. And of course, on our vehicles, the gasoline and diesel, these will be together about 70% of your inventory, possibly a little bit more. But we also do generate emissions from when we consume electricity. And people know this. If you use electricity from the power point here, National Grid is supplying you that, and they're using fossil fuels to generate it. We have 4 large power stations here in the capital region that are natural gas fired: the Empire Generating Center, the Bethlehem Energy Center. There's a number, Athens Generating. So all of these are burning natural gas to supply electricity to what you're using. So there is a carbon footprint associated with that. The good news, and I think I'll mention this later, is that our grid is relatively clean. So even though we do have fossil fuels generating, there's a lot of renewables as well. So electricity is relatively clean here. It's a good option for, and why electrification is always being talked about. So also, for those of you who don't know, use of refrigerants is an important greenhouse gas. The refrigerants themselves, HFCs, including those that we use in heat pumps, which DEC is phasing out. But you'll see that refrigerants are an important source of greenhouse gas emissions. Also from our waste practices, sending things to landfills, create methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and our wastewater treatment plants create methane as well. And we know and have learned that here your wastewater treatment plant has implemented a number of things to help reduce those emissions, and we believe that they are being successful at that. And then finally, there's an industrial process category. For those of you who use cement, that is a big greenhouse gas emission source in the capital region. You don't have any cement plants that work. There's one that we couldn't find. We don't think you have this source, but it is important. That's just the Lafarge facility down in, or Holcomb down in Ravenna, is 1 million tons per year, which is 5 times bigger. And that's one facility. So these are very large sources of emissions. And you'll see even local governments are sometimes looking at low carbon cement and other options. And it's important in their climate plans to do that. So your emission footprint here, and the number doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but you're 219,000 tons. So put it in perspective of the Ravenna cement facility, it's 1 million tons. So that just gives you perspective on what this means. So all of your energy combined in the town, from all your malls and all your cars and everything, is about 1/5 of that. But this is a fair amount. You'll see that here in your town, building fossil fuel is the biggest, 47%, and then followed by transportation at 35%. So this is not uncommon for the kind of community that Niskayuna is. It's often more equal. You'll see equal transportation and fossil fuel. So it means your transportation footprint's a little lower. It might just mean you're more compact or you drive less. Not 100% sure, but your building footprint is bigger here. Electricity consumption is only 10%. It's significant, but not the major source, which is important. And then you'll see the other sources are small, 5% for refrigerants. You have basically no agriculture in the town. There was a few tons that we found. And then waste emissions from waste you're generating and sending to the landfills is 3%. Next slide. So I drilled down a little bit more, and there's a lot more data here if you're interested in this, if you're a data nerd. But if you go into the building sector, you can break it down into your macroeconomic stuff: residential, commercial, industrial. And I know those are kind of small, but the orange one is residential. And why this is important is that if you do start looking at a community-wide plan, as a community, you have policy triggers, you have options, planning and zoning that can help influence the emission patterns. And residential policy is different than industrial. So communities want to know when they're starting their planning process where their emissions are. Some communities are highly residential. They have almost no commercial or industrial, and their policies are different. Niskayuna is pretty mixed. You have about 50% of your emissions are residences, but you have a pretty significant 28% commercial sector. You see all the malls around, and that's what that is. You have, and which is a bit unusual, communities usually of your size don't have as large an industrial sector. That's what the green one is. I don't know why I chose green for that. At 22%, and that is primarily the GE Global Research Center and some of the very large sources you have make up the vast majority of that sector. So those are important, obviously, employers, but they do show up in your footprint. A lot of communities don't have big industries, so they won't even have a sector at all. So you're a little different if you do a climate plan. Yes.
Is Knowles considered the Atomic Biolab? Is that considered commercial or industrial?
That would
Or
likely see it's likely industrial. So what happens is we get data, and this is highly localized data. So we get data from National Grid aggregated on their meters across what they call residential, commercial, industrial. We know that the GE Center is industrial. We can verify those emissions from a different source. It's likely Knowles probably coded industrial. Sometimes some things could be coded commercial.
So there is no coding for like government or yeah, I guess government use. It would either be a commercial or an
Yeah, so and I have that in here. The government operations will be part of the commercial sector. So most of your accounts would be coded commercial.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this particular data is from and we work with the Capital Region Transportation Committee. We want to run a transportation demand model using traffic counts to see what's going on your roads. Then we go back and we estimate what the average fuel economy of the fleet is. So we break it down into heavy vehicles, light duty vehicles. And so with those two things, we can back out how much fuel is used. It's not perfect. And in fact, some communities have better vehicles, they have more electric vehicles than we think they have. So there is some difference, but I suspect it's probably within 3 or 4%. You're probably good there. So it's really simulation of your traffic is the key driver there.
So a quick follow-up on that, please. So going back to traffic, and if you look at our major corridors along Woodset and Bolton, that certainly includes traffic from non-Niskayuna residents.
Yeah, we have that in the presentation. So we think it's about 10 or 15% of the total traffic demand is probably completely passed through on those corridors. Yes, correct. Yeah, so in fact, there is, and it's something that we're working on with DEC and the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. We partner with them on this kind of work to do an alternative analysis on transportation where we look at the model of trips that originate in the town, go outside, and those that then destine and stop in the town to get a better footprint of the responsibility of transportation demand. So we cut out the pass-through traffic. And it's a different way of doing the accounting, but it's something we know everyone's interested in. We think here it will make, 10 or 15% difference.
And a quick observation on your green versus the orange.
Yes.
Oh, okay. A quick observation on your green versus the orange. So even in the summer with everybody blasting the air conditioning, the electricity consumption is still like about a fifth of the heating costs in the winter with natural gas. And that is not even included by electricity.
Yeah, so I think if I understood this correctly, you're saying, the natural gas used for heating in winter is going to well over, it's going to be much larger than the electricity you're using for cooling.
Gotcha. That's what I was asking.
Yeah. And what you're saying is the green is the greenhouse gas emissions. It's not the actual energy. So your energy from electricity is a bit more. It just happens that the emissions associated with it are less. So that's why, electrification, if you move to a heat pump, you remove a lot more greenhouse gas emissions. Your energy is the same. You got to heat the building. You need the BTUs to heat. You need the same heat. But if you go to electricity, you're going to get a smaller chunk of emissions attached to it. So that's why that is a typical climate measure here. Anyway. Yes.
I have a very basic question. How can you help me to understand the concept of a pound of emissions? I have a hard time with that sometimes because I know a pound is a measure of weight. I'm sorry, a ton.
Yes.
Is 2,000 pounds. And I don't know how to think about that when we are talking about emissions.
Well, it's a good question. have a gallon of gasoline. Put it in a gallon. How much does that weigh? And so when you burn it, it's gone. So that carbon is connected to two O2 molecules. So the weight of your gasoline, let's say you have 8 or 10 pounds of gasoline in your hand. When you burn that, carbon is the molecular weight of 12. When you add O2 to it, which is 16 each, that's 32. You're actually tripling the weight of that, and that's your carbon emission. So if you have 10 pounds of gasoline and you burn it, you're creating about 30 pounds of CO2. That's what that means. So just physically, it's there in the air. And you can't see it, but if you did a compressor and you compressed it down into like a liquid form, you could then actually put it back into a gallon and you would have 30 pounds of it. I don't know if that helps. I answer that question differently every time. I get it a lot and I make it up each time and I have no idea if it's compelling or not. So, okay. Next slide, I guess, or wherever we were. Yeah, this one I think we went through. Okay, yes. So let's talk about some of the interesting findings that we have here, because there's a story and data and every community is different and interesting. These are not the same. And there's little tidbits of information that come out. So this one was actually pretty shocking to me, to be honest, when we did this. So this for so long, I just have an instinct for every one of these numbers. So I kind of know what they mean. So we did your government operations inventory first, and it was 1,770 tons, if I remember that correctly. So not that much. And if you compare it to your government, to your community, which is 200,000 tons, you're 1%. So your government operations are 1% of your community. That's phenomenally good. Normally you're around 2%, sometimes even 3%, especially in rural areas, you can be more at 3%. But in a city environment, even 1% is pretty low. And what that means, it implies, is that you're efficient. You must be doing something. So because the 1% is the equivalent of how much energy you're using. So how much gas in your police cars and your vehicles, and how much energy you're using to heat your buildings. And if you add all that up, you're only 1% of your community. So, again, your services that you're providing are implied to them be quite efficient, or you've already electrified a lot more, and that's possible too. But this is very good news. Generally, in a comparison sense, you should be expecting 2%. You're half of that, not even, well down. This could be the lowest I've ever seen, actually, because it's actually less than 1%. It's something smaller. So congratulations on that. Not exactly sure, but you're doing something here. Next slide, please. Here's an example of, and we didn't confirm this, things here at your wastewater treatment plant. There's been a lot of efficiency improvements. Apparently, you're collecting the biomethane there and generating energy. This would, in court, influence exactly the number that we saw if you're using less gas from the grid and using bioenergy, which is free and renewable. You're going to be obviously using a lot less energy. I actually have to caveat my being impressed with the 1% is that that's communities that don't provide wastewater services. This is an energy hog. This service is a big energy hog. It should be very difficult and expensive. So somehow you're providing this as well. So it's very impressive. So anyway. So some other things that we found that might be interesting. So per capita, per person, here you're 9.4 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. And that's better than the regional average, which is 8 counties in this kind of study that we did, which is 12.9. Again, it's a more urban, dense environment, so this would not be a surprise that it would be a little bit lower. Now, if you compare yourself to Schenectady and Troy, you are a bit higher than those communities. Per person, you're about 10 to 15% higher than those communities. Your transportation emissions, I think I mentioned this already, is lower than average at 35%. Your share, which is typically 40%. Again, I'm not sure why that's the case and what that means. And as I said, and I think to answer a question, some of your vehicle traffic is just passing through your corridors, and that's typical. So it's not really your responsibility. There's nothing you can really do about that. The last piece that's interesting is that we have prior data from 2010, we were doing this study almost 10 years ago and looking at these same kinds of things. And emissions here in this unit are down about 4% since 2010. So all of this interest in climate is making an impact. Emissions are actually going down. And that reverses in 2010, everything was just going up and up and up. So it is actually starting to turn around now.
Well, of note, we took our Climate Smart Communities pledge in 2010.
Well, congratulations. And so you can report the benefits there. And obviously that's helping.
A little, yeah.
Oh, no, well, that's actually factored into the analysis. So your population has grown for sure, but the energy use and the emissions has gone down. It's as simple as that.